Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Morgan, and yeah, the impetus for this presentation came from, Franz said he just met me, but I just started this position up in ITS as Digital Accessibility Specialist in April. And during my interview, Heather and I are sitting at this lunchtime interview, and I'm sitting there, people are kind of filtering in, and we immediately started talking about handicraft. Heather's a knitter, and I do embroidery, and so we had this moment where we were like, okay, we're both like tech people, we both do things that are digital, but we also are very invested in like physical material objects and in traditions and objects and things that are ancient, really, in some ways. So part of how we started talking about it, where's the clicker? Yeah. Sorry. One of the ways we began to talk about it was, come on, present. I can't do anything left-handed. I don't know why I'm trying to do it left-handed. There we go.
Let's make sure this works.
Yes.
Okay.
So Heather mentioned this woman, Kate Davies, who had a stroke and was a knitter and needed to completely like relearn how to make knit, basically. And so Heather's going to talk about that in a little bit. But when we saw the theme of the conference, the art of storytelling, accessible communication for the digital world, we thought we might talk about storytelling in nonverbal forms in the way that those stories are told in the digital realm. And originally we thought we'd do something more academic. We were looking at like cultural preservation and heritage and how those stories get told. But neither one of us really works in that area, so instead of going fully academic and making something that felt forced that we didn't know, we figured we'd talk about our own respective art forms. So we talked about it and decided, like, well, ITS is filled with all these really creative people who are doing things outside of work that really lend a broader understanding to the work they do for Yale and for ITS. I originally was like, okay, Scott Strobel, do all of you know who Scott Strobel is? He's Deputy Provost for Teaching. He makes these bowls, for instance, which are, he hand turns them himself from trees that have been cut down off different areas of campus, and then Yale sells them for like $300 a piece. But this is like a form of storytelling, right? People buy them thinking this is a physical object that tells some kind of story in a nonverbal form about Yale. It has some kind of meaning. It has an attachment to Yale in these very kind of more like symbolic ways. So I'm not going to talk about Scott for long, but I just think it's hilarious. I'm sure this is a Yale site. I'm not sure how accessible it is. You might want to check into that. It's probably not. And also like Lisa Sawin, who you all know, she has a great blog post where she jerry-rigs together a igloo cooler and a heating pad to make homemade tempeh. And Mike Vaughn, who is presenting right now as we speak, he also is a musician. A lot of people don't know that. He and his wife were really involved with musical education in Indiana, so much so that before they moved east, Fisher, Indiana, the town of Fisher, Indiana, named a day after him and his wife. So there is an official Mike and Nana Vaughn Day in Fishers, Indiana, so you should bug him about that. But again, like music, cooking, wood turning, these are all nonverbal forms of storytelling. Now, my personal involvement is I do embroidery. And so I want to talk a little bit, if you will oblige me and humor me to be a little self-indulgent and talk about my stuff and how I came to kind of think about this. About 3 years ago, I had a friend who now works at the help desk, Jill, and she gave me like this little cross-stitch kit for Christmas one year as a joke. And I did it, and then I got hooked on cross-stitch. I went online, I started finding all these patterns, stopped doing cross-stitch, but started doing hand embroidery, like free-form hand embroidery. And I was putting stuff up on Instagram. This is like, a little thing you can see here. Where's my, right? Like, just putting things up. That's a thing that I made for a friend who lived out in California. And whatever, right? Like just putting them up there. So what wound up happening was I would get 15 likes, 18 likes, my 30 friends would like something that I made. But I found this woman who in Massachusetts was doing a stitch a day project. And every day she would add a certain stitch, whether it just be like a particular embroidery stitch or some kind of image, she would add it to this embroidery piece. And she was doing this, I found her on Instagram. I said, I'm going to do that. And before, 6 months go by, it's viral, and there are about 100 people doing these stitch-a-day projects. So my teenager, who was 16 at the time, was like, you're kind of a loser, mom. Like 15 people stopped doing this, and then suddenly, like, you know, you see like in a couple months, suddenly like all these people like it went viral. Brown paper bag, the blog picked it up, and it was like suddenly all these people were doing these Stitch a Day projects, but it was really like an interesting project because each person's would look a little different, but they were very much about our lives. So I would add something that was like, oh, I don't know, like, I can't really, maybe nothing really good here, but I'll show you as we go on. Like how I was feeling that day might get like a stitch that was a little bit more interpretive of my kind of emotional state or whatever. And this went viral. I did it for a year, and then, yeah, those are my legs, right? Silly. And then I wound up doing like 2 of them over the course of a year because I filled up one in 6 months and then I filled up the other. And you can see like by the end of it, right, a year later, it's like ridiculous. And it's kind of just funny. From there, I started on January 1st of 2017, I decided to crowdsource my contributions to my embroidery pieces. So I got a bigger hoop, and I started with a centerpiece, and what I would do is take suggestions from all my followers. So every single day for an entire year, because I'm a little manic sometimes. My Ron says it's infectious positivity or whatever, but it's also just, you know, energy. Every day for a year, people would make comments in the comment section of Instagram. They would throw out something they wanted me to add. I would take however many number of people had made suggestions, say 20, 30 people. I would type that number into a random number generator, and I would have it spit out a number, and whatever number suggestion that was in the list, I would add that to the day's piece. I would tag the person in it. So it just grew and grew and grew. I promised my wife, like, I'm not going to carry this around with me all year, et cetera, et cetera. None of that was true. Like, everything had to stop so I could add my, like, stitch a day. But it became a real, like, serious community project with people who were really invested in it. I had people, like, Russian nanas, you know, to, like, gay boys in Australia, to, like, teenagers, you name it. Like, it was a very community-minded project in a way that I had never really intended. And people got so into what I was going to add. But not only was it like this strange kind of bridge between me and this like very traditional sort of quiet domestic art form that I was trying to work on and to develop, it was very much like you go from that sort of, I don't know, singular, you imagine like women like embroidering alone by the fire at night, and suddenly it became something that people were participating in across, you know, the entire globe. Truly, like people would leave comments in languages I couldn't read, I couldn't understand. When you go through, it's really interesting. You can't translate them, and I would like cut and paste, you know, like different characters into translators, trying to figure out what people were saying. But it also became very topical. So over the course of 2017, it was like, it wasn't just a community project, but it also became very much like a story about the year. Trump came into office. There were like things would happen during like the first time that he put the like smackdown on like we're not going to let any immigrants in. Like all of these people would make suggestions around political things that were happening as well. So it became a piece that was not just my own personal journey or the people who were following me, but really like cognizant of a larger social world. And you can see like this is what it looked like at the end. So at the end of December last year, this was the final piece, and it's about like this big. So it was a like serious, crazy kind of thing that just sort of happened to me, because then you get like all these people who suddenly want something from you too. But I've been thinking like, so after this, again, like people were like, "Are you going to do one in 2018?" And I thought, absolutely not. It's exhausting to feel like you owe the world a bit of your time every day when people like want to know where it is and they're waiting for you. And I really wanted to work on like smaller projects that were personal. I did other embroidery things throughout this time, but this really became all encompassing. So I decided not to do one in 2018, and instead I do like all these littler projects. So I do like abstract things. I do like more representational things. This was like a scene from the Botanical Gardens in Montreal that I stitched. And then I also have like a sort of stitch journal that I add sayings to over the course of the year, but I'm not on anybody else's schedule. But really, like what I've been thinking about in terms of how my embroidery sort of more broadly fits in with the term, like the idea of accessibility and the other things that I work on in my professional life. It's still like this very, I don't know, Instagram itself is a very visually oriented, it privileges sight. It's supposed to be about pictures, right? Even though I'm making these highly tactile objects that you can feel, which I think is kind of something that I'm working on a little bit more. So again, even though these are like abstract or not, like they're all still like very narrative to me forms of telling stories. Like I think of even the abstract things as being narratives, but, and I just added this little meme up here. This went viral. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This woman, she's an embroidery artist, and she redid this Arthur meme talking about the way women's work gets, it's not considered art, or embroidery isn't taken seriously because it's women's work. But then this like very tactile object, physical thing went wild. Like it was all over the internet for a little while. But Instagram, again, yeah, so it's like it privileges sight, but then there are other features of Instagram that are actually really accessible. So you can zoom in like crazy on images. This is an image I just took this with my phone, I posted it, and you can just blow things up very, very easily in Instagram, which is great for people who have low vision. There's no real character limit, so you could add alt text to all of your images that would really tell people what it is that they're using. There's, what else is there? Let me see, I have my list here, but I'm gonna run out of, anyway. Hashtags, all these things that allow people to kind of navigate through them. But I've been thinking more like, okay, what else could I do in my work that would bridge sort of this intense handicraft tradition with other sorts of, accessibility stuff. So I thought about it, like Heather and I were talking just the other day, and I'm like, well, there are people who are doing interesting things where you can actually like physically put braille, like fabrics themselves. And this is, like these are a couple of artists who are just, I'm not even sure what those say. This is just a sampler, I think, with some letters. I'm not sure what it says, but there are ways that these still tell stories that can be tactile and visual at the same time. And one of the things I want to do, and if any of you here have any connections, a thing that I've been thinking about doing is it would be really interesting, I think, to work with like the Center for Collaborative Arts and Media or with the CEID, looking at students here who may have disabilities or who have certain stories they want to tell about their experience, and working with them to do something more with materials, with either fabric or other materials that would render some of those things in Braille, and then also be able to, like, if you had a website, it could be read by a Braille, like a digital Braille reader. Like you could both have that Braille and then have that experience sort of transpose both the digital realm and the physical realm back through the computer, back into like the physical thing that people who might use Braille readers would use. And you can see like other companies are starting to do this. So this is a embroidery company that has figured out a way to make durable Braille on fabric. Usually like it will wash out after a few times. Until recently they had a hard time figuring out how to actually like keep the Braille so that it would stay tactile enough so that it wouldn't just kind of fade out. This is Louis Braille, and he invented Braille, obviously, in the 1820s. But something like that, I think, would be, I don't know, like an interesting project that I want to pursue further, and was not really thinking about until I started this job. What else? Oh, so other people. That's like my own sort of self-indulgent kind of explanation of what I do and how I think about objects and how I think about the ways that like every object that I make is a technology, and then also working in the digital world is a further form of that technology and how I make those things have conversations with each other. But I was, again, Heather and I were like, there are all these interesting people at Yale who are doing work outside of their professional day jobs here at Yale who are also telling stories digitally and that are using technology as a form to sort of explain, the wider world. So this is Louisa. Do any of you know her? She works at the IT. She's a technical support. She works in IT at the help desk, and she is a filmmaker, and she is awesome. She grew up in Ireland, and she has done short like documentary films about the Magdalene laundries. I asked her what she wanted me to talk about. She said this project in particular, those were laundries in Ireland that women who, like, in the US, I think we think of like, okay, you would have a relative who would get pregnant as a teenager and get sent to the Catholic, like to the nunnery, have the baby, and then come back. These were women who were wards of state or for whatever reason were given to the Catholic Church, and they would run these laundries, and they were basically enslaved. Like they couldn't leave. They could be, they were wards of state until they were adults, or sometimes even after that, if they were wards of state and the state had determined that they needed to stay there, they would work in these laundries. And she made a film about that. Now she is also doing, right now, this is Louisa there, she has been collecting testimonials through the sort of like Me Too movement of women, not just women, but mostly women in New Haven about their experiences with sexual harassment and sexual assault. And she's been putting those together, and I think they either just did or they will very soon be releasing like a bigger film that has all of these testimonials. And so she, when I asked her, like I said, she couldn't make it today, but I asked her to like send me a quote about the tie between the kind of physical film work that she does in the visual culture material objects that she's making and accessibility. And she said, quote, "The medium of film transcends so many of our regular boundaries to disseminating story. Anyone with a phone or camera can now take storytelling into their own hands to convey their unique message. With the growing accessibility of the internet, smartphones, and tablets, more and more people can communicate their own stories digitally, be it in the form of social media post, a blog or vlog, sharing a video and Vimeo, or creating a film and distributing it in a non-traditional manner, thus increasing accessibility and the diversity of our stories greatly," end quote. So you'll see, like, I noticed, like the idea of accessibility through art form is both, not just that we are making things, accessible because more generally people are able to have access to a bigger diversity of stories, but that there's a real connection for her between whose stories get told and then also who has access to those stories. So when we think about accessibility, and we're, Franz and other people over the past 2 days have been talking a lot about whose stories, we're storytellers. When we think about accessibility, we should be thinking about whose stories get told in addition to how do we actually access those stories, which is the subject of countless other presentations over the course of the past 2 days too, like the technical side of this is how we get this information to the people who may not otherwise have access to it, but also whose stories are we telling. And I'll back up, but in general, like, I feel so excited that I get to be part of the digital accessibility team now because I care so much about who gets to, has access to these stories, but also a really big part of, what I care about this job is whose stories are being told, what information is getting out there, how are we going to tell it, and that tie for me is like integral to this position. That I come from a humanities background, if it's not obvious, and so I am bringing the humanities to my digital tech job 100% of the time. I don't know how to turn it off. So Heather, I think I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who also has all kinds of great experience working with the material.
So I have a slightly different online persona than Michelle. I probably need to start this by talking about Ravelry. Ravelry is an online community of fiber artists. There's over 4 million of us on there, and it's basically the Facebook of fiber artists. It does look like it was designed in the 1990s, but that's okay. It works really well. And basically, it's a collection of knitters, spinners, crocheters, embroidery artists, actually. And it's a great community. People talk about, well, okay, so this is me. Everybody has their profile. Everybody posts their projects. We post our projects from the day we start them with progress pictures all the way until they're finished and we're modeling them on our much more beautiful friends. So for instance, actually, let me take this back. So for instance, you can be working on a project all by yourself, or you could be working on a project as a group as well. To bring this back to Kate Davies, who actually is how we became friends. She is a knitting designer. She became a knitwear designer because 10 years ago she had a stroke. She was a university lecturer. One day just had a stroke, lost complete mobility of the left side of her body, and she used knitting as a way to help rehabilitate herself to learn how to use her left hand again. Now she's turned that into a career of designing knitwear. She actually sells her own line of yarn now, and she's won all these awards for the small business out of Scotland that's really has an amazing following of tens of thousands of knitters, probably more actually. So earlier this year, she posted a project where everyone would work on it together at the same time, post their progress, and share stories about what they were doing. So she has a hat pattern, and it has a basic color work design, and it was up to us to pick the colors that we wanted to use. So there were weeks of everybody swatching colors and everybody sharing their ideas and people liking other ones better and starting over, and it became this big group activity of about 5,000 people were involved with this, of everybody sharing their information about colors and ideas and inspirations and pictures of places that were inspiring them or things that were inspiring them. And this was mine, and it was basically inspired by spring, because I started this in January, and it was freezing cold. And it was, basically the water melting and the green sprouts coming out and the first few flowers that bloom on a warm day. And so, I started way back at the beginning posting pictures, shots all the way to the final object, which everybody shared and prizes were given, and I didn't win one. But that's okay, because I have this great hat that I actually love. Then one day I'm going around, I'm looking through Ravelry at the local groups because I'm new to New Haven, and if you don't know that, I just moved up to Connecticut last year. So I'm new to New Haven, I'm looking through the local groups, and I come across this photograph, and I'm like, wait, I know who that is. This is Kim Miller, if you don't know her. She works on the digital accessibility, well, I guess not. She's in web technologies. And I recognized her, but I had no idea who the person who posted this picture was. So I start chatting with this woman, and it turns out she used to work in ITS as well. This is Faith Brown. I think she's retired at this point. She left right before I started, but we've become friends online because of the picture I found of Kim Miller, who Faith also knits sweaters for Kim's dogs. And this is where I enter my own gratuitous puppy shot with my own dog and my own knitting. But let's talk about some other people at Yale who are doing these things. This is Jen Lawler, and I don't know any of these people, just so you know. I just stalked them on Instagram. She works in the CTL, and she dyes yarn. Absolutely gorgeous yarn, and she posts pictures of every step of the process. So I, see her dyeing it. I see them drying. I see the finished product. I see them knitted up. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it's so much fun to watch. There's Alexa Martindale, who teaches knitting at Morse College, and they have a fiber art studio, which is absolutely amazing, and I'm going to start stalking that too. Wendy Lewis, who teaches crafting classes to Yale staff that are amazing, and she's a jewelry artist. So there's all these amazing people at Yale who are doing all of this great stuff, and I learned all about it online without ever actually having met any of them. And they all have great stories to tell, and let's bring it back really quickly to Kate Davies. And what I wanted to say is, she's an amazing storyteller, way more than me or any of the other people have talked about. She's a great writer. She was a lecturer before she, started doing the knitwear, and she's actually coming out with this book, which talks about, how she's incorporated knitting and then design, tool design, industrial design, visual design, and how they all play into, recovering from various traumas in life. Not necessarily disabilities, but just working with the everyday, and how good design and thoughtfulness go, I guess, universal design, how it plays a really strong part in everyone's lives. And this picture is what tied me to Michelle the first day I met her. Is I knew this book was coming out, and I remembered this amazing embroidery on the cover. And so when Michelle told me that she was embroidered, this is the first thing I thought of. I think it was also about tools. Didn't you do your dissertation on tools?
Well, yeah.
Or something?
Yeah. Q&A.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to end this with this, which is the same embroidery artist who did the cover of that book, because it's really amazing, and it's a great story of how she created this amazing piece of art and how it ended up. And I think this is a really great use of the internet and digital media to tell the story of what people are doing in the physical world. Because a lot of us spend too much time focusing on the digital and really turn to the physical for our extracurricular activities. And it's a really great place to be able to share them and get like those out into the world and encourage other people to join in. We actually, on Thursdays at Science Park, teach people how to knit down in the first level lounge. So if anyone's interested, we're usually there on Thursdays at noon. But really, trying to get other people at Yale to show us what they're doing and talk about, what they do in the physical world and get it out there for other people to experience. And so we're asking everybody, well, there's not that many people here, but if you are a maker and you do post things online, tag it so we could find it.
Yeah, and that's really it, but that's the end of our official presentation. But I've had students, I was a grad student here, and I've had former students or people that I knew in the community who we found each other through, these sort of kind of online communities, which is really what the subtext of this presentation is about, is the way that online communities connect right across the world. But it's not, there's never been a real, I don't think, a concerted effort to connect with each other at Yale as a community of people, artists and people who make things outside of our professional jobs. There are little communities across New Haven, but I'm more interested in building okay, what are the other interesting things that people are making here, and how might that connect to their jobs? For me and for Heather, a lot of it, with Kate Davies and the sort of inspiration that she's been to you and the position that I'm in now, it's really about how can we think about other ways of connecting that physical world and the digital world, especially around accessibility. For me right now, that's what I'm thinking about 24/7. So, and I would welcome any of you who make anything in the audience to let me know if you do, and maybe we can do some kind of collaboration and take it from there. So thank you.